here. So some examples in the book, and I said this is what I would encourage you to read. This is on page 1010. Starting here, they already did the alkanes and alkynes, and they did the ring structures, and then they start on this page, and this is where we did some of this in class already. How do you name alcohols? And so the OH, the carbon with the OH on it, that's the alcohol group. That's called what's that called again? Remember that's called? Yeah, carboxyl group, right? Or is it hydroxyl?
Sorry, say that again.
What do you call this right here in organic chemistry?
Hydroxyl.
Right, because carboxyl is the acid, wasn't it? That's the COO, C double bond OOH. This is hydroxyl. And so when you read this, it'll say, well, what if you had an alcohol that the carbon was not, in this case, not attached to either one carbon or no carbons? It'd be called a primary alcohol. And here it is connected to two other carbons. That's a secondary and tertiary. We talked about that. And then they talked about the names of it. And I don't know who did alcohol. Who did alcohol first? And do you remember telling them that by far the number one alcohol made, and it said here,
It's ethanol.
Yeah. Well, no, you said that yesterday, and I corrected you.
Methanol.
All right. Blame with me. Okay. But anyway, it was methanol, and it says here 4 million tons annually. Okay, and it says here, look how they made it. It's weird. They make it from what? Carbon monoxide? And again, did a real chemist figured out these catalysts, but is it one you had to pay him a lot of money? Or is it one that we got? We don't know. I don't know that one, but somebody said, if you have this and that, then it'll do this. And again, I don't know who figured that out, but it made one company a lot of money. Then you go down here, alcohol, the second kind of alcohol you've heard of. What's the one that is in all kinds of drinks and things? Ethanol. Now, there's two ways of making ethanol. One is biological. Did you ever stop and think, they go all over the world and they find a tribe that, some people that live in a part of the world, no one's even seen these people. And guess what? They probably make some alcohol. Did they ever go to college and learn how to be a chemist? I think it's weird that every society, every civilization has learned how to let some kind of fruit or wheat or something ferment. Let yeast or bacteria take the food and turn it into alcohol. And then all you have to do is learn how to separate the alcohol from the other stuff. And it seems like almost every civilization has learned how to make alcohol biologically. And that's ethanol, isn't it? But to keep up with the demands in a lot of countries, how else can you make ethanol? And this is how you don't have to worry about... Another thing is, if you use biological, you can't go beyond maybe 12 or 13%. Why not? They're going to make around 10 to 12, 13%, and why not?
Because any higher will kill the yeast.
Yes, it'll kill the yeast or the bacteria. And so, but I know that you can actually buy drinks that are more than 13% alcohol. So they must be able to make it another way. And so the other way was, what is this right here called? Can you see this very well? Can I? Oh, I'll magnify it. I'm sorry. What is this called right here?
Polyhydroxyl.
Wow. Did you hear that from somebody?
Where did you get that from?
You saw polyhydroxyl. Where's that at?
It says many polyhydroxyl alcohols are now the most
Oh.
important.
That's
Okay.
smart.
Okay. All right. Wait a minute. Now, wait. That's the next thing. But the one up here, what is this called right here, though? Don't even. That next sentence. Wait. The next sentence is for something else. So what is that right there? CH2 double bond CH2. Ethene, also known as ethylene, right? And so you have that, and it says here, with the right catalyst and water, you can make ethyl alcohol. And so you could have a whole industry that was just based on that, and they could use it And some people get into, I saw an article the other day about, Kentucky, right? Kentucky, they are so big, Jim Beam, and they make all kinds of bourbon, which is a type of whiskey, bourbon, and they make this, and then a lot of times they store it in certain kind of containers, and it's the oak barrels, and some of the chemicals in the wood will, over time, will seep into it, and that's where they get supposedly this really good taste. And that's why some of these bourbons might be, like a bottle like this, like $300, whereas you can get another bottle down the street here for maybe $15. So, and I'm not that kind of person, but I know that some people said, oh, if you have never tasted that kind of bourbon, they act like, it has a different flavor. And but anyway, so they're probably, this is the way they make it, though, artificially. You might say synthetically, like that. Now, the word you used, I've never used so far, but polyhydroxyl means if you have more than one OH group. Okay, so far I haven't even taught that. But they do give you one example, and the reason I want to bring that up is this is a really simple compound. Instead of being ethyl alcohol with one OH, it has two OHs, and believe it or not, this will kill you. And this is what we put in cars in your radiator, and it's called ethylene glycol, also known as antifreeze. Now, unfortunately, this stuff has a slight sweet taste to it. So if you were to let this leak out of your radiator onto the driveway and you don't clean it up, a stray cat or dog, they would tend to want to lick it, and it can kill them. So you do, if you have any kind of antifreeze that comes out, instead of being alcohol, making them drunk, it'll actually kill them. So in this case, adding one more OH group turns something that from alcohol into a poison. Yes?
Wait, so you were talking about how if you let the alcohol ferment too much, it like gets rid of the yeast or whatever is fermenting. So how is it they can let it sit for like 300 years or something without that happening?
Well, what they're doing is some of them actually let it sit there for 5 years or 10 years, but it doesn't increase in alcohol. It increases in some of the flavors. They think that the oak wood, that it seeps in there. They actually, every so often, they turn the kegs, and they it's not more alcohol over the years. It's actually more a certain kind of flavor they're looking for. And it's hard to believe if you go there to these places that, oh yeah, those have been there for 20 years. Well, that's been there for, wow, you're going to make something and nobody can touch it for 20 years? Yeah, that's our business. And then they have some you can touch right away. All right, so then when you come down here, they talk about how to name alcohols. We did that in class. And then we go over here, and by the way, the name of an alcohol, like hexanol, pentanol, right, ends in OL, alcohol. But what if it was an aldehyde? How would you name it if it ended in a, here's your carbonyl group right here, see that? And a carbonyl group, aldehydes and ketones both have a carbonyl group. Here's a ketone. A ketone has a carbonyl with carbon-carbon. And an aldehyde has a carbonyl group with hydrogen-hydrogen. And that's how you know the difference between those two. But how do you name something that is an aldehyde? What's going to be the end of that word? And if you turn the page here, what is the name of this right here? And that's the way you could actually study for this part. You cover this up and say, what would I call that? You say, well, that's an aldehyde, and it only has one carbon, so what could you call it? Okay, methanal, right, for aldehyde. The old name, which is still around today, they still use this for preserving things, called formaldehyde. Okay, that's just a common name there. What would you call this one? This is an aldehyde that has, this one is aldehyde with two carbons, so ethanol. And then this one is a ketone. It has, see the carbonyl, it has carbon-carbon. That would be 3 carbons, and it's a ketone. What would you call that? Okay, let's take a look at propanone. Now, the only reason you have to say, you have to tell me where I don't think you have to put the 2 because there's only one way to make propanone and have that C double bond O in the middle. So, okay, and if you go to college and you take organic chemistry, you will hear the word acetone a lot. Acetone is like water in the inorganic world. When you want to clean your test tubes in organic chemistry, a lot of them, water won't do it. So guess what? They have big things of acetone, and it dissolves. It dissolves a lot of things. Used to be that I think fingernail polish remover might still be acetone. Does anybody know? Is it? Okay, so it dissolves a lot of things, and I think it's acetone. So, okay, look at the next one. What would you name that? Well, you say, well, do you see the ketone group or not? Do you see the C double bond O and then a CC? Okay, and so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 carbons, so it'd be pentanone. But now you do have to tell me where the double bond O is. So where are you going to put it?
2.
Let's take a look. 2 propanone. And really, a large part of the test is you look at something like this, and it has multiple choice on there, and I think you can, if you just kind of take your time and go through these pages, you're going to be all right there. Okay, now let's go down to acids. How do you name acids? And we actually had that in Organic Chemistry 1. How do you name acids? We know this is the Cu thing, isn't it? The Cu. But how would you name an acid that had the Cu on it, but it had a total of 2 carbons? What would be a good name for that? Oops, I'm sorry. Where am I at? Oh, wait a minute. Uh-oh, this is ester. It's my fault. Where's the alcohol? Where's the acid at? Okay, over here. All right. Okay.
It's definitely that.
Oh, not good, not good.
Okay, sorry. Over here, they were showing, I'm looking for acids here. They don't have very many examples of acids. The only 2 that we had so far were, if you had 1 carbon, you were methanoic acid, and 2 carbons with ethanoic acid. So the 30 carbons would be propanoic acid, 4 would be butanoic acid, pentanoic acid, and so that it's oic acid right there. Okay. Yes, thank you.
And you can write them in, or I can fill it in later if you need me to,
All right.
if I'm available.
Ooh,
And-
that's great.
And here's your, and they're done
Wow,
like
you already
that.
cut 'em?
Yeah, they're done, so you know, that's how it's done for you.
Wow.
Yeah.
She really helped me today, Ms. Shaw. She's really, really helped a lot. So thank you very, very much. Okay, there you go. Where's that? Okay. Oh, okay. Now, what about an ester? How do you name an ester? And this right here, what is that? Instead of oic, what is it? O8. Okay. All right. One more thing, and then we'll get to polymers today. When you hear the word amino or am something, what 2 elements always come into play when you say am, like amino, ammonia, ammonium, nitrogen, and hydrogen? Isn't that right? And so right here, the amines, and who had amines? You had amines, okay? Look, do you know, see this amine right here? See the carbon attached to it? How many other carbons are attached to that amine?
Really?
Wait,
So see this carbon?
Very
See the?
good.
All right. So this. I'm sorry.
Did you see the nitrogen?
I'm sorry. This.
Carbon?
I'm sorry. My fault. This. This group here, this amine group, is attached to 1 carbon. Okay. So I think you did a good job. I remember on your presentation, you actually talked about this. It said, if you had, where am I? Yeah. If you had your amine group attached to only 1 carbon, it would be called a primary amine. And what if it was attached to 2 carbons? Secondary. What if it was attached to 3? And that's the same thing we saw before, isn't it? That'd be tertiary amine. So I think you actually
Tertiary.
mentioned that in your report. That was good.
Very good.
All right. We're going to use that word amine pretty soon when I get into polymers. Have you ever heard the word amino acids? I bet everybody has, hasn't they? that's going to come into play again. You know what an acid group is? That's a carboxyl group, and you know what amine is. And when you look at it, you said, well, no wonder they call those things amino acids. All right, so the first thing is I'm going to give a brief history of plastics. And it talked about this person a long time ago in the mid-1800s. And it says he spilled some things. I'm going to tell you something I should not have done. I should not have done this. Back then, if you were looking for information, we didn't have internet. But it did have encyclopedias. And we had encyclopedias at my house. And I like learning things. And I remember looking up nitroglycerin. I remember looking it up in an encyclopedia, and it says something about mixing sulfuric and nitric acids together. Okay. Now, I should have done this, but in my chemistry class, I shouldn't have done this. Okay. I remember going in there, and the teacher was not in there, and I was so interested in what would happen if I put concentrated nitric acid and sulfuric acid together. So I put them together in a test tube, and it looked like nothing was. And I had a little bit of glycerin. Glycerin is a slippery material you can get, right? So I put them together in a test tube, and man, it looked like nothing was going to happen. We had an assembly. Okay, so I left the test tube there, and I said I'll come back and clean it up. And I went to the assembly. An hour later, I came back, and the whole lab stuff had come out of the test tube. It was all over the place. And I didn't want. I got nervous. I thought I'd get caught, and so I had to clean up everything. And I didn't know exactly what happened, but it blew up somehow. And it's not that I really made. Did I really make nitroglycerin, or did I make something like it, or whatever? It's something that must have gotten really hot, really fast, and everything else came out of the test tube, I think. So what happens is the nitric acid was to add nitro groups. Nitro groups attached to things can make bomb material. When you hear about terrorists, and you say, how can a terrorist get their hands on this material to make bombs? Well, you can go to a store and buy a fertilizer. And a lot of fertilizers have nitrate groups in them. They're called nitrates. And you can get them. I can put them on my grass, nitrates, it makes the grass green. And then you get gasoline. And you put gasoline and fertilizer together, you can actually make a material that will make a bomb. Now, if you compress it and then have a fuse, it can actually make a bomb. And anyway, so here's this person in the mid-1800s. He accidentally spills sulfuric and nitric acid together. He cleans it up with his wife's apron. And his wife's apron is made of cotton. And we're going to talk about what cotton is. And now what happens is the nitro groups get on the cellulose of the cotton. Now he's made this thing called nitrocellulose. He rinses it out and hangs it up to dry. And what happens to it? Anybody read this yet?
Explodes.
It caught on fire, burst into flames by itself. Now, if you're a magician, you know this is called gun cotton or flash cotton or flash paper. And you can make it so that it's so sensitive, you could just touch it, and that's enough to cause it to burst into flames. Or you can have a piece of paper, a magician, light a match, burn it out, and that little tiny heat left, it'll just flash, and there'll be no trace of the paper left behind. Well, this is called nitrocellulose or gun cotton. That kind. You can do it with cotton also, and it does make it can make a flash thing. So he didn't really make a polymer, but he nitrated a polymer that already existed. So are there some polymers that already exist in nature? And God's pretty neat about this. He made polymers way before we figured out what they were. And so the sheep, their hair, right? that's a polymer. Your hair is a polymer. There are polymers all over the place that exist naturally. And then humans eventually figured out how to make them synthetically. How do you make them synthetically? So this guy here, and I don't know the date on this guy. All right. Well, I see the date he lived, but I don't see the date he did this. So anyway, he was messing with some stuff, and the reason I want to bring his name up is that if you ever are an antiques dealer or you wondered if something you got at Goodwill was worth a lot of money, if you ever find a radio that looks really, really old and it's not cracked, if it happened to be made of a thing called Bakelite, Bakelite was the first plastic that any human had ever made. The problem was kind of a little bit brittle, and so over time it gets more brittle. So if you were to find an old radio somewhere in your your grandmother's attic, and it was Bakelite, look it up before you give it away. It's probably worth a lot of money, because so many of them were broken. There's almost none of them that don't have cracks in them. So Bakelite was the first plastic ever made, and I think, Jeff, I'm not certain, but did you have polymers that had to do thermoset? Who had the word thermoset plastic?
Me.
You did?
Condensation polymers.
Yes. Okay. Did you have thermoset?
Yeah.
Okay. So thermoset means what? What does it mean if you're a thermoset polymer?
That can't be heated and remade.
Right. So once you form that shape, you can't recycle it and turn it into something else. A lot of other ones we can. Okay. That was Bakelite. The other one you've heard of is nylon. I can't believe that anybody in here does not know about nylon rope. Have you ever seen nylon rope? It's, you can use it. You don't have to worry about it. Ski ropes are made out of nylon. So a whole new industry occurred when they started making these polymers. I'll tell you. There was a huge organic chemistry which just kind of exploded in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Before that, like 1850s and something, they thought, we've learned everything we could about chemistry. They thought there wasn't anything else to learn. Okay, so let's talk about polymers again. Another one more. Besides nylon, what's the other one down here they talk about is rubber. Did you know that rubber was a polymer? Okay, and so when you read this, and there's a real famous name here, this guy named Goodyear. Have you ever heard of Goodyear tires? The Goodyear blimp. Okay, so here's Charles Goodyear. He figured out how to make a polymer out of this. And he found out, I don't know how he found this out, but he used sulfur. And when he used sulfur, I remember when I was really, really young, the first time I ever heard it, I didn't know what they meant. It was called vulcanization. What's that? And vulcanization is where you add sulfur to it, and it made the rubber so it wouldn't fall apart. And all of a sudden, rubber tires, everything that was made out of rubber just exploded. All right. Now, before that, do you know how we made rubber, like before that, though?
Sort of found in nature.
Yes. There are rubber trees.
Like cork trees.
Yeah, now cork is actually the bark of a cork oak tree. So believe it or not, the bark is really thick, and you can take the cork off these things, and I know you don't believe me, but in Spain and Portugal, they have cork masters.
Yeah.
And when they make these corks, they grade it. And if it's it's a great cork material, it goes in your fine wines, the real expensive ones, because they don't want air to seep in that cork. If it's for a chemistry lab like I have, that's going to be a very low grade of cork. No, I don't really want air to get in there, but yeah.
It's also synthetic cork, right?
Yeah, I'll bet you can make. I don't know about that. You could call it something else. It could be synthetic.
You could look that up for extra credit. No, I mean,
But people actually have made. They've taken the bark off of cork trees. Not only make corks, they've made flooring. You can buy cork flooring. Companies learn how to take all the crumbles of cork and press them together and make cork floors and stuff like that. All right, so let's talk about this again.
What's a cork?
One more brand name. Here we go, another brand name. Not Goodyear, but we'd already talked about this. This one would have been ethene or ethylene, but they substituted fluorine atoms for the hydrogen atoms. And we talked about this in number 1, in organic chemistry number 1. And this was called tetrafluoroethylene. Now, when they made a polymer out of it, they found, and when I was younger, I couldn't believe it. No one before that time, every pan was made of either copper or aluminum or iron, like cast iron. But you had to, if it got burned on, you had to scrub it and scrub it. That's what steel wool was all about. But nowadays, do you even have a pan at your home that doesn't have a special coating on it? And the first special coating, a non-stick coating, was called not tetrafluoroethylene, but Teflon. Now, they actually still sell Teflon tape. Teflon tape, if you're a plumber If you have two things, you screw them in and you still have a leak, you unscrew it, you put this real thin Teflon tape, it's stretchy, and you put it back on, it stops the leak. So if you're a plumber, you always have Teflon tape on there. All right, that's another Teflon thing. All right, one more before I get into the real heavy stuff here. If you have a chance to read this article here, it talked about a chemical that, over time sometimes get cracks and stuff, and it ages. This chemical that they have, it had little bubbles in it, and when a crack appeared, the bubble would erupt and it would heal it. It would actually heal itself. And so if you had cracks over time, it would actually fill in its own cracks over time. Now again, did anybody make any money? I don't know. I don't know about that. But here's what they used, this stuff here. Okay, that's enough of the brand name. So now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get into this packet. Now, the packet I gave the original, if you go back to the, find it. Here it is. I got it right here. The original packet that I gave you, if you look back here, it just happened that even though I wrote my own notes, I had a student willing to type them up and add some drawings to it. This is Courtney Carlock. Was anybody around when she was around?
My brother was.
Okay. Anyway, Courtney happened to, she did this. And so let's talk about polymers, okay? Polymers are a long chain of monomers. You say, what's a monomer? A monomer could be anything. It's a repeating unit. A monomer could be small, like ethylene, right? It could be small like that. It could be big. And so polymers are macromolecules. Now, how big you're talking about? You have at every cell you have DNA and RNA, don't you? DNA and RNA are polymers, and some of them are 10 million atoms big. Now that's a pretty big molecule. We actually have bowling balls now that are made of polymers, and they're all connected to each other. All the atoms are connected, sideways, this way. You could say that there are some bowling balls that is one molecule, because everything is linked to everything else. So what we did is synthetic polymers, plastics, rubber, styrofoam, PVC, nylon, polyester, Dacron, that kind of stuff. All those fibers are synthetic polymers. Okay, now what are monomers again? How do you make monomers turn into polymers? And you said you had one, Parker had one, and he said, what's one way to do it? And he said, well, one way to do it is, did you have the addition, or did you have the,
I had
addition polymer? Okay, and which one did you have?
Condensation.
Okay, so let's take a look at that one first. Let's go down here. Let's say we had a double bond and a double bond, and you found the right catalyst. You could turn that into a long, long, long chain of this is a monomer, this is a monomer. But what did you lose any atoms on this? Did you lose any atoms? Okay, but you had to start out with a double bond, didn't you? But you don't lose any atoms. The double bond simply turns into a single bond. And that's the addition polymerization, okay? And then you had condensation, right? There, you take something off of one monomer and something else off another. You take an H off of you and an OH off of you, and that turns into water. By taking the water off, this, whatever atom that is, wants to form a bond with that guy over there. And so then the monomers will start adding to each other. And they might be different monomers. See that? Yes?
What differentiates like a massive chain of carbons in a polymer from just a saturated hydrocarbon?
Well, that's a good question. If I found a hydrocarbon that had 100 carbons in it, I don't know how. If I don't know how it formed, then I just know it's there. But in this case, they're purposely trying to put them together to form, and it could be 10,000, 100,000, a million units long. That's a great question. If I discovered that there was something that had 50,000 of these monomers together, if I know it was natural, it's still called a polymer, but it must have occurred naturally. But if humans made it, I call it synthetic polymer.
I guess what I mean is, if you saw an octane atom, could it actually just be?
All right, what's the threshold of, I'm gonna call you a polymer? That's a great question. I don't know.
You should define that.
That's a great question. Like, is 8 enough to be a polymer?
Yes, it's 2
I
or
don't
more.
know. I've never read it. I never read the numbers. Say if you get past 50, we're gonna call you a polymer. I've never read that. So that's a very good question. Okay, so anyway, I'm gonna show you this. And anyway, what kind of polymers occur out there already? And God already knew how to make these. And so we know. If you were in biology class or you took it at one time, you heard of things like proteins, haven't you? And you talk about food, right? You talk about food, don't you say I have to have protein?
Yep.
But what are proteins? Proteins are actually long chains of amino acids. And they're hooked together like that. And those are called proteins. If you're in biology class, did you talk about globular proteins versus enzymes? Okay, so if you have a protein that folds itself into kind of a ball-like shape, it might be called a globular protein, and its job might be to be an enzyme. And you have other proteins whose job might be to be a structure. So part of the cell membrane has protein in it, right? That'd be a structural protein. The other kind of proteins are enzymes. Their job is to be an enzyme, not to be a structure. So anyway, proteins, as a matter of fact, from the Latin word protein, means of first importance. The most important thing your cell makes are proteins. So proteins are a long chain of amino acids. So I'm going to start with this, and I'll show you a little model here. Let's see if I can find it. Oops. This right here, I've had this probably for about, 25 years, but this used to be the classic toy that you give to little babies and things like that. And it normally didn't hurt anybody. I will say that sometimes a finger can get caught in there. And if you're a little bit older, if you have a little bit older brother and sister, maybe they're 1 or 2 years old, they can actually get their fingers stuck in here and it starts to swell up a little bit. But I don't know if I see these on the market anymore. Have you seen these before ever? Okay, so they're really a kid's toy. But when I had these, and my kids are all start growing up, I used to teach biology a long time ago, and so what I did, made it into a chain of amino acids. Here's glycine, lysine, serine, cysteine, glycine again, lysine, tryptophan, isoleucine, methionine. But anyway, have you heard these words? Okay, so these are amino acids. And amino acids will be the monomers. And you get them together, it makes a polymer. Now this is not quite a protein yet. It's not yet, but it is a polypeptide chain. Now why do they call it that? Because they want to call this special bond between the 2 amino acids, they want to call that a peptide bond. Okay? And that peptide bond, there's another one. So here's a polypeptide chain, and right now it's not good for anything. But this is called the primary structure. The primary structure of an amino acid is the sequence of the amino acids. Now you may not think that's important, but if you know, and again, 9th grade biology is one thing, but if you guys are taking it again, you should be a little more advanced, meaning where does this sequence come from? How did my cells know to put that amino acid first, and this one second, and that one third? I bet you know. DNA. Now, right. Now, DNA is also a polymer, but DNA has a code on it. And a code are these chemicals called cytosine, guanine, adenine, and thymine, A, T, C, and G. And just like
Sometimes
a computer might have a code with only 2 letters of the alphabet, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1. We could represent almost anything we want with only 2 letters of the alphabet. God decided to use 4 letters of an alphabet. And in the sequence, AAA, TGG, CCC, that might eventually turn you into a blade of grass. But another sequence of the same basis might make you into a monkey or into a worm. And that's what amazes me, is that every living thing has this genetic code. That's where the code is, and the code is in the sequence of the basis. And that code has to be that kind of sounds strange. The code that's in DNA can't be read by the cell. The cell doesn't know what you mean. It's in a code I don't know. And so what happens is the cell says, okay, I'm gonna take the DNA code and I'm gonna transcribe it into another code. Do you have your transcription? Okay, so transcription is where you take DNA code and you turn it into another code with RNA. RNA, okay. Now, RNA leaves the nucleus and goes out to the cell, and it finds a ribosome. And a ribosome is where proteins are made. And so here's this little messenger RNA hooking up the ribosome, and it says the first amino acid says A. I mean the first base, I'm sorry, says A, and the ribosome says, I don't know what you're talking about. And it goes in a little further and says the first two bases are now AA. I don't know what you're talking about. And then it goes in a little further and it goes AAA. Oh, I know what you mean. AAA means you want me to bring phenylalanine. Okay, and I'll go ask another chemical. It sounds weird to say ask. Another chemical will bring phenylalanine. Does anybody know what chemical I'm gonna draw this on the board tomorrow. Does anybody know what chemical brings the amino acid to that message? What is it? T. I always remember T being like a little truck. That's my little truck, okay, or transfer RNA they call it.
Or cross.
So the transfer RNA brings that amino acid and says, sit right here, okay? And then that's how you get the protein sequence. So the sequence that you found in proteins came from the sequence that was in RNA, which came from the sequence that was in DNA. It is absolutely amazing. What we found out also is a lot of cells have a mechanism that over time, if you're exposed to things like chemicals or ultraviolet rays or x-rays, you can cause damage to your DNA. But I have 75 trillion cells. Does it really matter? Does it really matter that this cell right here, it got his DNA messed up and he died tonight? It doesn't matter. And these kind of cells, they have nothing to do with me passing on genetic information to the next generation, do they? They're called somatic cells. Is that right? Do you have that word, somatic? What we don't want to do is have damage into the germ cells. I hate that word, but germ cells would be like egg and sperm. Because if you have damage in the DNA there, then if that sperm happens to fertilize an egg, that whole new human starts out his life as a fertilized egg cell. He's got chromosome DNA from the dad, DNA from the mom, and you start with one cell. And if that cell has damage in the sequence, then every cell it makes from that point on will copy that damage. Now, some of the damage is so bad that human will not be born. And they'll be spontaneously aborted, there'll be a miscarriage. And sometimes not. Sometimes they are born, and the only thing they can't do is digest milk, because one amino acid is in the wrong place. That means one base on DNA is in the wrong, something's wrong with it. There are some people that, if you have just one mistake, you could actually wear a belt and wear a chemical. I can't make a certain chemical. Okay, why don't we give it to you? Here, just put this on here, and the chemical you're missing, we'll give it to you. And they can have a fairly normal life like that. Yes?
I'm not sure where I heard this, but I think I heard a rumor that like all fetuses in the body start as like a female, like in the very start. Is that
okay.
true? That's true.
They're true.
They have,
So women are better than men.
We're all
okay,
girls. We used to
so
be.
I don't have time for that. It's called, if you,
So
one of
everyone's
the classes I
trans.
really enjoyed in college, well, I didn't hear that at all in high
Trans
school,
across.
was called developmental biology. And they go from 1 cell to 2 to 4 to 8, and then they eventually have this little shape, and they have a blastula. You guys do that, you guys do developmental biology?
Yeah.
Anyway, and so you have this ball of cells, and then it does something weird, and the ball cell starts folding in on itself, and it ends up making, I don't want to get too much into that, but I think what you're saying is that at one time, it might have a certain body shape, but if you give it a little bit more time, the genetics of each cell will make chemicals that would erase that and form something else. So I've heard that too, that was like that. You also, all of you start out with fingers that are all attached to each other. You have like a paddle. And then eventually, some cells died off. Some cells were given the signal to die off, and then these died. And what's amazing to me is that the ones on this side of the fetus, it also did the same thing. So they talk about chemicals communicating with each other and how they do that. How does this arm go to be that long, the same length as that arm?
But it's not the exact same length because.
I'm not saying everybody, but it's pretty close.
Yeah.
It's close. All right, listen, tonight, not tonight, because you're gonna be busy. Tomorrow, I'm gonna rethink the idea where we're at. I really do wanna have the 90-minute period for the test, but if I feel like we're just not quite there, for Tuesday, then I think we have another 90-minute, no, you're not.
Yeah, we got it one
We
late
have
in the
one on
week.
Thursday.
I might think about that, because, I can't really ask you to do anything tonight, because we're gonna be doing a lot of stuff tonight, so anyway, all right.
What do we, do you have STEM?
We have STEM.
I have study.